Hey, it seems like it wasn't all that long ago when customers were coming in complaining that they were too cold, and now in many parts of the country they're coming in with the opposite complaint. They're not cold enough. Well, that brings the air conditioning system into play, doesn't it? And that's the topic of this edition of The Trainer. Okay, low refrigerant level can certainly be a cause, and it's probably a leading cause of why air conditioning systems don't blow as cold as they should, but it's not the only cause. So when I get a complaint of a car that's not blowing as cold as it should, I like to go through just a basic performance, basic system check as I'm bringing the vehicle in to get a feel of what's happening with the system. So what we're going to do is start the engine up. And then we're going to set the AC system controls to blow as cold as this system possibly can. That means we want the blower on full speed. We want maximum AC selected and make sure that the recirculating door is closed. Once I have that, we're going to put a little hand over that center vent and get a feel for how cold it's actually blowing. And then I'm going to run through and make sure everything's working the way it should. First, all the blower speed's working, run it through. All the way down to low, and back again. Then I want to check the temperature control. With the system installed and running, I'm going to go ahead and move it all the way to the full hot. See if I see a change in temperature. It could be that it's a temperature blend door that's not working the way it should, and that's causing the low, not blowing as cold complaint. Once I'm reasonably confident that the temperature selector is working, then I'm going to go and make sure that that recirc door is closing. The way I like to do that is to set it on max AC and then take it off of max AC. Some systems, of course, have a recirc door button that you can push to close that door. Listen for a change in tone of the airflow and listen for that door to be moving. Again, very common source of a not blowing as cold as it should complaint. Sometimes the owners don't even realize that they have that feature and they need to close that recirc door in order to get that system blowing as cold as it should. Why? Because if we leave it in fresh air mode, that AC system is trying to pull the heat of all that hot exterior air before it gets into the cabin. When we close the recirc door, now it's going to circulate the air in the cabin and it's going to cool that air down much, much faster. I'll finish up by going through the different mode door positions. Make sure that the airflow changes from the center, the floor, and on up to the defrost to make sure that all the mode doors are working the way they should. Once we've taken a look and made sure that all that's working properly, if we still have a lack of cooling in the cabin, we're going to move on to the next steps in our checks. Right now, all that we've done the inside checks, it's time to move under the hood for a few quick visual inspections there. If we didn't have any cold air at all, the very first thing I want to know is the compressor clutch engaged? If not, we'll pursue that as a separate option. There's some videos that we have out already that can help you very quickly determine the reason why an AC compressor is not engaging. And then we'll just do some old basic hand checks. Reach over and grab that low side line. Is that getting cold? How about the high side line? Are they hot to the touch? Once we've done all that, we should have a pretty good idea of which direction we want to go into next. Now we have a preliminary checks out of the way, I probably want to move on to a more detailed inspection. I'm going to hook some gauges up to it. I'm going to check the ambient temperature and the duct temperature a little more accurately. And I'm going to compare those numbers to the OEM specifications to see where I lie in terms of what is considered approved or normal performance for this vehicle. But before I do that, I want to make sure I don't harm any of my equipment by ingesting something from the system that I shouldn't. You know, one of the things we have to be careful with as technicians is that there's a lot of do-it-yourselfers out there who are looking for a fast fix, especially when it comes to their AC systems. And there's a lot of products on the market that include the addition of sealants that may or may not be compatible with your equipment. Before I do that, I want to make sure that I know if there are already sealants in the system. And the next thing I want to make sure of is exactly what's in this system. Yes, this is an R134A system, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's what's in it. There's a lot of blends on the market. There's a lot of counterfeit stuff on the market. There's a few dangerous things on the market. The last thing I want to do is inadvertently connect to a system that has something in there that's not as advertised. So let's start with the sealant detection. And we're going to use a kit made by the folks in Neutronics. And you can Google that if you want, find out more information out about it. It's a pretty simple process. We have these sensing plugs that are sealed. So we're going to open one of those up. And excuse me, get some water. Because most sealants react with air or in the presence of air or water. So we're going to put a little water in both ends of this sensing plug. Just a little. A little more on that side. And then we're going to kind of let that sit for a moment. In the meantime, we're letting the system itself prep. We've already run it, obviously, so we've got the system circulated. If there isn't any sealant in it, it's had plenty of time to circulate. And we've let it stabilize for a few minutes now. So I got my sensing plug ready. Then I'm going to attach it to my adapter that fits onto the high side line. There's only one way you can plug that on. And then I have a safety ring that we're going to use. Then next comes a length of hose. Get it fully seated on the tool, on the sensing plug. And then last but not least, on the other end, is a flow meter. And that's what we're going to use to see. And it's pretty simple. We're going to allow a small amount of flow out of the high side port, and we're going to measure with the little ball valve in here what that is. And then we're going to let it sit for a few minutes. If we're over a minimum of 1.5 on the little ball gauge here, then we can continue the test with the engine off. If not, we'll have to set the car up running to see if we can get that flow up above that minimum level. And then we're going to let it sit for a few minutes, 3 minutes to be exact, and we're going to monitor what that flow does. If the flow drops more than 30%, then there's sealant in the system. All right, let's hook it up and try it out. Okay, right now I'm reading a little more than 2. We're going to let it stabilize, let it get up to its peak. And then we're going to just let it watch it and let it wait for 3 minutes. All right, so we've confirmed that there's no sealant in this system. That's a good thing. But what do you do if you do find one that has sealant in it? What do you do then? You can't suck that down into your recovery, recycling, recharge machine. You're going to contaminate that supply that you have in the machine. If you have an old machine, then you need to suck that down into that old machine. Use that jug as scrap, if you will, that you can dispose of according to federal and state and local regulations. Now that we've got the sealant issue covered, still one more thing. Like I said, every car that you hook up to, you want to make sure that whatever's in there is the right refrigerant for the application. Again, there's a lot of blends out there. There's a lot of counterfeits out there. We've got a lot of online sources that the DIYer can buy from. It may say 134 in the can, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's what's in the can. And to do that, we're going to use a very simple to use refrigerant identifier. You know, one of the common reasons that I hear for technicians and shop owners that don't perform refrigerant identifications on every vehicle they service is the cost of the equipment. Well, here I'm going to share this tool with you. It's from Robinair. It's also available from some other suppliers. And this is a very economical and easy to use identification tool. Now, yeah, there's some higher end models on the market that are very good at what they do, give you a more complete test result, even allow you to print it out so you can keep that with the records and share that information with your customer. But at the very least, I'm going to know, again, before I hook up my very expensive equipment to this vehicle, that I'm not going to contaminate that equipment or that virgin supply in the process. Okay, this unit, like I said, is very easy to use. The very first thing we're going to do is we're going to connect power to it. We already have that connected to the battery. There we go. And then we're going to hit next, and it's going to go through its warm-up phase. Once it's completed its warm-up phase, we'll move on to calibrating. Once the warm-up cycle is complete, the calibration light will start to flash. Once you see that, we're going to grab this little rubber ball here, which brings outside air into the machine, and that will that'll begin the calibration process. So we're going to squeeze that 5 times. And then hit next again. Once the calibration is complete, the analyzing LED will flash. Now that that's flashing, we connect our test port to the low side fitting on the vehicle and hit next to analyze the refrigerant itself. Now that the test is complete, you can see in our case we've got a flashing light over the pass side of the tool. That's telling us that we have at least a 95% pure R134A mixture in this system. Of course, the opposite is also true. If I see the fail light is the one that's flashing, that means that I have a defective charge in the system. The one you're probably going to see most of the time, though, is the one here. It says excess air. Think about it. People who are servicing these systems are trying to make time on flat rate, and I've seen way too many cases personally where guys did not vacuum down the system before they recharged the system after repair. You open up the system for repair, what immediately goes in? Air. If you don't get that air out, you're already behind the 8 ball. And if you've got air in the system, that's going to cause higher head pressures in the compressor, could lead to premature compressor failure, and certainly it's going to affect the cooling capacity of the vehicle itself. Okay, we got all that stuff done. Now let's do a standard system performance test with the gauges and some temperature readings. Okay, I've got my manual gauges installed, and I also have a temperature humidity gauge installed. This is a neat little thing that I found at a recent MAX convention from a company called Brighter Solutions. It gives me relative humidity. It gives me the ambient temperature out here where I'm standing. And it's also giving me the duct temperature inside the vehicle. So I've got all that in one place. Nice little thing to keep on hand. So we got that information. Now we're ready to make the static test. Why I have all this? Because that's what the OEM service procedure tells me that I need. A few words before we start the test. Make sure that you check the OEM service information for the vehicle that you're testing on the conditions of the test. There are some manufacturers who want you to roll up all the windows, close all the doors, and seal the cabin tight. There are others who want you to open the doors wide open to get a stress test on the system. In this case, on this Dodge Ram, windows up, doors closed, system at max AC. Again, that's full blower, max AC, recirculation door closed. Static pressures we're going to take a peek at. Right now I'm reading right about 90 psi on the low side and just about the same on the high side, which it should be on a static system. Don't pay a whole lot of attention to that. That's not going to really give you a feed on how much refrigerant's in the system. All I really want to know is, do I have enough pressure, if need be, to do a leak down test without adding any refrigerant to the system? And generally, if I have at least 50 psi in the system, I've got enough where I can do a sniff test with my sniffer. If it's got dye in the system, so much the better. I'll pull out my UV light and look for traces of dye. But all that said and good, now we're ready to go ahead and start the truck up, and let's see what kind of readings we get. Again, this test is being done. We're trying to stress the system. We're trying to get it to blow as cold as we can. So it's going to take a few minutes for it to stabilize, to get rid of that cabin heat that's in there already. I think I misinformed you there earlier. The inside temperature here, see if I can get that closer where you can see it without too much reflection. Maybe that'll work. The in is where I'm standing out here in this hot garage. You can see we've got about 48-50% relative humidity, not bad for a Florida day, and the temperature is pushing 89-90 degrees. But we can see that the out temperature, the one where I have the sensor placed in the center duct, and that's where you want it, is starting to drop. We're going to let it run until that drops as low as it's going to get. Take a look at our pressure readings, and to compare that to the specifications in the service information system. Okay, we're only a few minutes into the test and the inside temperature has already dropped below 50 degrees. You know, as a technician, if I saw a vehicle that was cooling 40 degrees inside, cooler than it was outside, I'm really happy with that, and so should the customer. If they're still complaining that it's not blowing cold enough, make sure they're operating the system properly. Like I mentioned earlier, if they're not using that recirculation door function, they're actually stabbing themselves in the foot. They're not letting that vehicle get as cold as it can, so correct them on that. And if that's still not the case, well then, maybe they need to go see the doctor. Maybe they're suffering hot flashes or something. Can't help you. Your car's doing what it's supposed to do. Okay, we're at most 5 minutes in the test now. It looks like the temperature is holding stable right at 47 degrees in the cabin according to my temperature gauge. And a 90-degree reading here in the shop. 43% humidity, which again, is not too bad for Florida. We're usually a lot higher than that. My gauge rating's 34, 35 on the low side, 135 on the high side. Let's go take that to the spec sheet and see if that's what we should have. All right, well, we've gotten our test results. We know that we're running about 34 PSI on the low side and about 135 PSI on the high side. That sounds a little low. Let's compare it to the specs here. Sure enough, when we check our chart, we can see that with an ambient temperature of 90 degrees, which is about what it is inside this garage, we should have at least 55 degrees at the duct if the AC is working properly. Well, we got that taken care of. We're reading 47, 48. I'm good with that number. Low side pressure should be 30 to 40 PSI. Good with that number. But just as I thought, the high side should be reading somewhere between 250 and 350. Very common cause of that is low pressure. Does that seem to fit? Yeah, does that actually mean there's a major loss or leak? Could be. The system, it's a 2013 truck. Don't know if there's been any service done on it in the past. Maybe we'll proceed with recovery recycle to make sure it's got the right quantity in there. But before I do that, let's run that test again. This time we'll ask the PCM what that high side pressure reading is, just to make sure the gauge is telling us the truth. All right, I've got the car running. You can probably hear it in the background. Now we're going to check with the scan tool, and I don't know if you can quite see this on the screen or not, but I'm reading anywhere from 1100 to 1300 kilopascals on the scan tool. So that confirms the gauge readings where it is accurate and is telling me the truth. So yeah, looks like we may have a problem with some low refrigerant charge. We'll move on to that next. Why? You may be asking yourself. It's blowing 47 degrees on a 90-degree day. That's pretty darn good. Are we going to improve that? Another reason for that, and I'll get to that next. All right, well, I know that the system high side pressure is lower than what it should be. More than likely, it's a refrigerant charge issue. Next thing I'm going to have to do is recover the system, measure what I took out, and then recharge it with the proper amount, do another test, see where that pressure goes back up to where it's supposed to be. But you might be asking yourself, Pete, why are you going to go through all that trouble? You're blowing 47 degrees in the cabin. That's plenty cold. Send that guy down the road. I wouldn't be doing this guy a favor if I did that. Here's why. The old days when we used to put 3 or 4 pounds of refrigerant in the system are long, long gone. This truck, for example, only holds 1.19 pounds, and there are cars on the market that barely hold half a pound as a refrigerant charge. So when there's just a little loss in a system that only has a little bit to begin with, that can make a big difference, especially if the system relies on that system charge to move the oil through the system and keep everything lubricated. I don't want this compressor dying a premature death because I didn't make sure it had the proper refrigerant charge. Speaking of oil chargers, here's something else you'll remember. Forget the old rules of thumb about how much you add for a given component replacement. You've got to follow the OEM balancing procedures for the vehicle you're working on. You can't just throw an ounce here or 2 ounces there. Again, some of these vehicles don't hold that much oil to begin with. If you put too much oil in, you're going to cause problems with premature compressor failure, and at very least, you're going to impact the cooling ability of the system. You're coating those heat exchangers on the inside with oil, and the heat can't get out. Do yourself a favor. These systems are just like every other system on the car. They're high-tech, the tolerances are very tight, and their room for error is very small. Take the time to read the service information system for the vehicle that you're working on and do the testing and the repair right. That's all the time I got for this edition of The Trainer. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next month.